Welcome to the Canine Decoded Show. Today, my guest is Dr. Daniel Promislow. I hope this is how I pronounce your last name correctly.
Close enough.
Close enough. How would you? How is it right?
Promislow.
Promislow. Okay.
Back in the old country, it would have been Promislow.
Yes, my German kind of pronunciation kicked in here. Thank you so much for being today on my show as a guest. I'm super excited about talking with you about dog aging and the dog aging project. For those who don't know you or don't know the project yet, what is this all about, and how did this all start to figure out how dogs age?
Well, first of all, Melanie, thank you for inviting me to speak with you and to share the story of the Dog Aging Project with your listeners today. I'm really delighted to be here. And I should say that the Dog Aging Project team is not just me, and we're almost 100 people who work on this project, and there are a lot of us who know a lot about it. But I'm happy today to represent the team.
Yes.
So the big picture of the project is that it is an attempt to understand how and why dogs age, and especially what are the biological factors and the environmental factors that influence how well each dog is going to age, or not well, as the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big open science, community science study. So we've enrolled over 48,000 dogs of all ages, sizes, sexes, breeds from every state in the US. And we are tracking these dogs for their entire lives. We continue to recruit. So if your listeners are interested in joining, they can just go to dogagingproject.org and join the study.
Yes, I will put the link in the captions for everyone listening, so you can just click on it and join.
And so we started thinking about the project about 15 years ago in 2007. We formally launched in 2018, 2019, started recruiting our first dogs. And the real strength of the study comes from the fact that people love to share the stories of their dogs and their relationship with their dogs. And those stories, that information becomes our data that allows us to do science.
Mm-hmm. So there are obviously so many questions that I have and that pop up with this. But in terms of answering questions that you have, and I'm assuming you also have a lot of questions, do these insights come up and pop up as you screen the data? I'm assuming it's going to take some time to get meaningful things out of it. 48,000 is a lot. And finding correlations or causations and whatnot. How do you have a main goal to answer one big umbrella question, or are there 100 different little questions, or both?
That in itself is a good question, and the answer is both. And I will try and tell you a very big story in a very short, concise amount of time. There's so much to talk about. Yeah. We might have to have a second podcast.
Yes.
So that the project has been funded by a grant from the National Institute on Aging, which is part of NIH, and they care a lot about aging in all species, and they know that ultimately they care about people. They know that we can learn a lot about people from dogs. But the cool thing is that the Dog Aging Project also is good because it helps dogs, not just teaches us about people. So I mentioned that grant because the structure of the grant reflects the different questions that we have. So I told you that the big overarching question is, how does biology and environment shape variation in aging? And let me back up a little bit. We already know going into this that there are short-lived breeds and long-lived breeds. In general, the large breed dogs, the giant breed dogs like the Bouviers and the Mountain Dogs and the Great Danes, don't live as long as the Shih Tzus and Chihuahuas and Dachshunds. In general, the mixed breed dogs also live a little bit longer than purebred dogs. So we already know that, but that's just a little piece of the story. And so the big question is, why is it that even within a breed, there are dogs that seem to age incredibly well and dogs that don't? I should also say that we don't put a value judgment on how long a dog lives. If you just love yourself a Great Dane, even though you know that pup is not going to be in your life for a very long time, if that's the right dog for you, that is the right dog for you. And then the question is, well, given that it's a short-lived breed, how do you make sure that it's going to be the healthiest long-lived dog possible. So to your question, that grant that we wrote had a lot of big topics in it. So the first big question is really a descriptive one. How do dogs age? In human medicine, we have all the specialties, orthopedics and ophthalmology and dermatology and so on. Geriatrics is a human medical specialty, and geriatricians have a really deep understanding of all the things that happen as we age. And if you bring a loved one into the geriatrician and he or she is in their 80s or 90s, pretty quickly that geriatrician will know how well that person is aging. Is this person a healthy ager or not? In veterinary medicine, we have all those specialties. We don't have geriatrics. And so the first big question that we're asking is just what happens as dogs age in very many different dimensions, including of real interest to your listeners in terms of behavior. And we can talk more about that, of course. The second big question is about the underlying biology, and in particular the genetics. Are there genes that we can find that vary among dogs and that play a role in how well that individual is going to age? The third question is environmental factors, air quality, water quality, the kind of heating in the house. Do you use gas or electricity or wood stove? Social interactions. Is there another dog in the home? What about availability of green space outside? And then finally, the underlying molecular biology. So that's where we sort of do the deep biology dive. We take samples, not from all of the dogs, but from about 1,000 dogs. Every year, the owner brings them into the vet. We look at blood samples, hair, urine, fecal samples. We analyze them. And the molecular data from those samples can tell a very powerful story, not only about how quickly that dog is aging and in what way, but potentially why it's aging the way it is. So those are the big questions. And in some cases, as you alluded to, we have specific hypotheses that we're testing. And in a lot of other cases, we're doing what you as a data scientist appreciate as discovery science, that often we learn a huge amount just by looking at how the world works, just like the 19th century naturalists went out into the world and just observed. And from that observation came up with some of the most important ideas in biology.
Yeah.
We're just also observing what happens, and we can learn a lot and come up with new hypotheses that then we can test.
Yeah. I think this is a very interesting thought that we forget with our dogs in terms of what aging really means, right? Because you don't think about it. Out of the sudden, your dog is, you see the dog graying and slowing down in motion, potentially getting diagnosed with some diseases. And then out of the sudden, you have to say goodbye. But there's this whole phase that no one really knows how to optimize, potentially support, maybe even get the dog live a little bit longer. And I think a lot of owners do certain things intuitively, right? But there isn't like this whole analysis around this. Like you said, we have this all set up for humans. And in a way, the connection between how dogs age since they live so closely with us, right? How does this also affect us, maybe our aging and, this whole connection there. I can already see my listeners having so many questions and I already know what they're thinking potentially. But so far, before we switch to specifically the behavior, is there something that you found the most surprising or the most interesting or intriguing finding insight that you want to drill down further that you maybe didn't expect?
The first thing that I'll say is we're really just at the beginning. This is what we call a longitudinal study, which means that we're following the individuals over time. The alternative is a cross-sectional study where you just do a one-time study with young dogs and old dogs. By following dogs from early life onward, and in some cases we have older dogs that enroll, but we continue to follow them. It's that longitudinal piece that we can observe what's happening today, and then 3 or 4 years from now, we can look back and we can compare the dogs that behaved in a certain way or the dogs whose owners were giving them supplements or not giving them supplements and ask, what was the effect of that? Of course, there's already a lot that we've learned. Some not surprising. For example, we know that dogs that exercise a lot tend to also be dogs that have better cognitive function. We don't yet know exactly how the causal arrows go, what causes that relationship, and that's where the longitudinal piece comes in.
Yeah.
And some fun results. Dogs that have another dog in the home tend to be healthier. We don't know why, but that's one of those things that's a really fascinating observation. And now we're going to start drilling down more.
Yeah.
And some unsurprising results that as dogs get old, their risk of disease goes up, something we already knew. And we're learning a lot about their activity patterns as they get older. They tend to get slower. They spend less time exercising. Maybe not surprisingly, rural dogs spend a little more time outside exercising than urban dogs, possibly for lots of different kinds of reasons. So there are lots and lots of findings that we've published. What I'm really excited about, well, I'm excited about all of it, and we'll get to the behavior, but the part of the project that in addition to leading the whole project together with Kate Creevy, who's our chief veterinary officer, she's at Texas A&M. I should mention, I was at the University of Washington until March, and now I'm at Tufts University at the USDA Human Nutrition Research Center on Aging, which will be the new administrative home of the Dog Aging Project. But our team is all across the country. So the particular part of the project that I'm working most closely on is the molecular biology. And we're starting to look at the data, all the small molecules that we can measure in the blood and the genetics, the fecal microbiome, and finding signatures of aging in those molecular markers. And those are potentially really powerful biomarkers for disease prediction. Is there a disease risk in the future that we wouldn't otherwise know about, but for looking at these biomarkers? Just in the same way that people can take a glucose tolerance test as a biomarker of diabetes. There are all kinds of biomarkers for lots of different diseases. Can we identify biomarkers of healthy or unhealthy aging that are good for prediction, for prognosis of disease, and ultimately for prevention? So all kinds of things that we're already discovering, no end of things that we can still discover.
Do you, by any chance, you probably collect, obviously, the breed, the information on it. Do you also differentiate between, say, a pet dog and a sport dog, or even kind of like, I don't know, military dog or a police dog? Do you have these kind of differentiations too?
We do. We ask the participants what sorts of activities the dog's involved in, if it's a working dog. Most of our dogs are not. Most of our dogs are companion animals and not working dogs. We're really interested in working dogs, and I'll just tell a brief story that some of your listeners might be interested in. I was contacted by an organization that leads the training and use of courtroom dogs in America. And this is something I didn't know about. There are dogs that are specially trained as service dogs to be there for people who are testifying in a courtroom or who are victims of a crime and testifying before police or lawyers. And the dog is simply there to help them through this incredibly stressful experience. In many cases, these are young children, and the dog will just lie at their feet, and the child will hold on to the dog, and it gives them a sense of comfort. In a courtroom, the dog's job is to be so quiet and so still that nobody even knows it's there other than the person who's testifying. So these are just lovely dogs, and their job is to not run around, to not wag their tail, to not bark, to not do anything. And the question is, how stressful is that behavior? Doing that for many, many hours every day, day after day, does that take a toll on that dog? And how does that impact that dog's aging trajectory?
Yeah.
So we're really, just a little side story that to point out, while we don't have many working dogs enrolled in the study, we've talked about creating special cohorts of working dogs, whether they're military dogs courtroom dogs, dogs that are helping people with hearing impairment or people in wheelchairs or whatever kind of working dog to better understand how the stressors of being a working dog impact aging.
Yeah, I love that so much, especially in combination with finding biomarkers and the molecular biology, because a dog that is trained to be still and does a wonderful job, you can necessarily see the stress that the dog experiences, maybe right before entering the courtroom or after, or how long it lasts. So the importance of having some sort of measurements that are more as objective as possible rather than what the human eye sees in the behavior is wonderful, because that ultimately is something that can actually make a difference in terms of how we train the dogs. And maybe these dogs need something else in addition to coping with that stress better in those moments. So I love that a lot.
The other big question that I'll mention
Yeah.
that we've had lots of conversations around is the challenge of identifying which dogs in training for service are going to be successful at their training. We've spent a lot of time talking with Canine Companions for Independence out in Santa Rosa, California. One of their leaders, Brenda Kennedy, and I've had many conversations about whether there are ways to identify not only how long a dog is going to live, but also how successful it's going to be as a trained dog. So it takes a lot of time and effort and money to train each of these dogs. And so it's important that each of these dogs, if we can predict which of those dogs are going to have healthy, long lifespans, and also which of those dogs are going to be successfully trained at what they're being trained for. Not all of the dogs pass the class. Some of
Correct.
them
Yes.
fail out. Now, we should be so lucky to be able to adopt some of those dogs that fail out. They're wonderful dogs. And it may be a subtle thing that that dog can't do. Maybe it needs to go up an escalator and it can't. And how many dogs actually go up escalators? But those biomarkers might turn out to be those powerful predictors of both behavior and of long lifespan. And that's something that we're really interested in identifying.
Yes, because most of the time now you put these dogs through training. They'll have to go through training until you realize they might not be suitable for the job, or they are washouts. But you don't know until you know often. And knowing that beforehand, or at least having a higher chance of knowing, saves a lot of time and money for everyone, right? And potentially also from the dog's perspective, not being pushed through training that the dog might not be suitable for, meaning it's too stressful or whatever, the dog can handle well. In terms of nutrition and aging, because in a way, this is something that we have a lot of control over, what our dogs eat. And me also coming from Colombia and having worked on the gut-brain axis, we all know that nutrition is such an important factor. Is there something that you can share in terms of correlations that you've seen? Causation probably more difficult to make statements here, but how does nutrition affect aging or potentially getting sick and aging faster?
This is what we could spend hours talking about. We don't have enough time today, but I can tell you a little bit about what we know and a lot about what we don't know and what we hope to learn. So all of the participants in our study join by first filling out a long survey. Some people complain about how long it is, and it can take a couple of hours, but it is the superpower behind the Dog Aging Project.
Yes.
The generosity of people around the country filling out that survey is what makes our science possible, including a survey about diet. And we actually are rolling out an even more elaborate survey for a smaller group of participants, a food frequency questionnaire that will tell us in more detail about what dogs eat, how often they eat it, and so on. This is of critical importance. I'm sitting here in the Jean Mayer USDA Human Nutrition Research Center on Aging. So my colleagues care deeply about nutrition and aging. We know that they're really important. So quickly, one thing that we've already discovered, and this is thanks to some work that a talented scientist who's a new faculty at University of Arizona, Emily Bray, was looking at how often dogs eat. So there are people on this listening to this podcast who feed their dog just once a day, others who feed their dogs maybe twice a day, others who have dogs, and I've certainly had dogs in the past and currently have one like this, dogs who are not at all food motivated and you just hope that they're going to eat, and you leave the food out all the time, and maybe they'll take a couple of bits
Yeah.
now and again. In the spring here in Boston, it's a challenge because there are a lot of ants, and we can't leave the food
Yes.
out because the ants are going to get.
Cannot do here in Atlanta either.
Yeah. So one of the interesting findings from Emily's work is that in our survey, dogs that feed just once a day are also dogs that tend to be healthier in certain ways, especially in terms of gastrointestinal health. Dogs that feed once a day are much less likely to have pancreatitis and GI problems. That doesn't mean that feeding your dog once a day will keep it healthy in terms of GI health.
Right.
It could be the other way around. And the reason I think about this is because our former dog, Frisbee, lived a long life. She lived till 16 and a half, which is really long for a 45-pound dog. When she was about 14, she got pancreatitis, which is one of the things that in our data we don't find in dogs that feed just once a day. When Frisbee got pancreatitis, I went to the veterinarian who knew Frisbee well, and she told me that I should make sure that Frisbee eats lots of small meals every day. If she eats one big meal, it could be really dangerous because your pancreas can't handle it. So it could be that the causal arrow goes in the other direction. And the reason that we don't see pancreatitis in dogs that are feeding once a day is because if they had pancreatitis, their veterinarians would tell them to feed them often. We don't know that yet.
Mm-hmm.
Getting back to what I mentioned earlier, as a longitudinal study, when we look at young dogs that feed once a day or fed once a day, twice a day, throughout the day, 5, 6, 7 years from now, we'll see what happened over
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So we'll find out. So that's one interesting thing that we've already learned. We're asking lots of other questions. Of course, we have participants who feed dogs kibble, homemade food, store-bought raw food, vegan diets. We have everything. The important challenge that we face right now in this landscape of dog food, nutrition, and health is an absence of good science.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the good science that's been done is limited to dogs that are kept in colonies by the large dog food companies that do long-term research on the foods that they make.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a lot of data from the dogs like your dog and my dog that live in our homes and experience our complex environment and the random foods that. So we have a brand new grandson, 6-month-old, cutest baby in the world. He was over last night, sitting in the high chair while we were eating dinner, dropping food on the ground, and Pete, our dog, was eating up that food. That's the real world for dogs, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so what we really need are large scale, long term observational studies, trajectories of health in dogs with different kinds of diet.
Yeah.
We don't have those data from the real world yet. The exciting thing is that that's exactly what my colleagues on the team are collecting. We have lots of experts. We have a veterinarian at Virginia Tech, Audrey Ruppel, who leads an environment core that's collecting all kinds of data. Part of that core is Dr. Katie Tolbert, who's a veterinarian who's board certified in nutrition. We have the veterinary leader of our whole study, Kate Creevy, who's a board certified internist. We're collecting the kinds of data on nutrition and health that a few years from now will begin to be able to answer the questions that your listeners want to get the answers to. We're also, I'll just mention briefly,
Yeah.
we also have tons of data on supplements. And I know that's a huge area of interest in both human aging and pet aging. And again, we have an absence of data. If you go online, people in human space, people will say, oh, you should take this supplement and that supplement because it was observed to increase lifespan in mice, but we aren't mice. So we're collecting the kind of data. Problem with human data is that it takes decades to collect because we live, fortunately, so long. Dogs, unfortunately, don't live so long. So 5 years from now, we will have some excellent data that will help us answer these really important questions.
So we'll bring you back in 5 years then, and then we'll
well, hopefully sooner than that, we'll have really cool data and you'll want to have another conversation.
Yes, I can wait. But yeah, I understand And I know from my own experience how difficult it is to analyze nutrition in any kind of nutrition intervention because it's such a complex thing and so hard to track. Even with humans who understand, like, you're going to just eat this for 1 week. Back then, that when I worked on celiac disease in humans, so hard to measure because all these little things that can have an impact that sometimes people don't know that they're actually eating something that might have an impact. They forget to mention it. Now ask them to mention everything their dog eats. It's almost impossible. So the amount of data that you're collecting and the time that you're observing them makes up for these little errors that will be otherwise really hard to track, right? But and it's okay if you can make any statements. Instead of saying maybe this is the perfect diet, can you make a statement and saying, for example, raw food is not a problem? Not that it might be the best diet, but it's not as problematic as it's sometimes being discussed. It's very controversial still, right? A lot of vets, but also other people are like pro or con. Can we make a statement? Is it evil or is it just the question mark, but probably not as evil as people might think?
One of the cool things about the Dog Aging Project, one of our core values is that we're science driven. So we make statements that are backed up by science. So I should say I'm not a veterinarian, nor am I a nutritionist. So I don't have the expertise to weigh in
Right.
on that. And I'm not sure that we yet have the good science that really tells us what the best diet is for a dog. I've heard lots of opinions and I know that, and I don't have the experience to have a strong opinion. And if I did, I would please some of your listeners and I would upset others. But I really don't have a strong opinion. I will tell you, so we feed our dog primarily kibble. Our previous dog, after she got pancreatitis, I became someone who made homemade food because I needed to give her a special diet.
Yes.
So I cooked vats of food for Frisbee. But because my veterinarian told me to, and that's the one thing that I would say to your listeners, that I think the first best thing that you can do is talk to your veterinarian who knows both you and your dog well. And they're likely to give you some good advice. And then also be patient. I think a few years from now, we will have some really good large scale data. It takes a lot of work to collect the kind of huge data sets to really get a sense of what's best. And it might turn out breeds are so different. It might turn out that an ideal diet in terms of maximizing the health of one breed or one sex might be different than for another breed or sex. So we still have a lot to learn.
Yes. Okay, well, we will wait patiently then. And in our last, I think, 10 minutes or few minutes, I want to touch on dementia and Alzheimer's in dogs, because I also think that is something that people might observe, that their dogs seem to be out of it or not understanding things anymore, don't know where to go anymore. But I don't think there is enough data, or there hasn't been like a real clear understanding of what's going on. So what do we know so far in terms of dementia and Alzheimer's, and also how this, for example, compares to dementia and Alzheimer's in humans?
This is a really important question and something that many people on our team care a lot about. We actually have spun off a separate ancillary study that's led by Dr. Stephanie McGrath, who's a veterinary neurologist at Colorado State, along with a team of people around the country she's leading. Like humans, dogs do get dementia. And as in humans, it tends to happen quite late in life. If you look at all the major causes of mortality in people, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, and liver disease, and cancer, they all increase exponentially. The risk of each of them tends to double about every 8 years, starting from our 30s. Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease, two major dementia causes of mortality, start much later in life and go up more steeply. Interestingly, in dogs, the same is true, that they do get dementia, but they tend to be diseases of very late life in dogs. We don't see them before about the age of 11. And so many of our giant breed dogs tend not to get dementia because they just unfortunately don't live long enough.
Yeah.
So it's something that we're really interested in. The study that Dr. McGrath is leading, together with Dr. Dirk Keen, who's at the University of Washington, who is a human neuropathologist who specializes on the brain pathology of people who die with Alzheimer's disease. That team is looking at whether dogs with canine cognitive dysfunction, which looks very much like Alzheimer's disease, have the same pathology. There are specific cellular and molecular pathologies that we observe in people with Alzheimer's disease. And it looks like at least one of the two main pathologies shows up in dogs as well. So we have a team that's looking at that. We don't yet know to what extent some breeds are really protected from it. It looks like it's not affected by size. It mainly, all dogs tend to increase the risk starting at 11 or 12. There are certain behaviors that are learning behaviors, for example, that seem to be associated with this. Dr. Evan McLean, who's at the University of Arizona, is working on this. And I should say that both Dr. McLean, Dr. Bray, who's also at the University of Minnesota, Dr. McGrath at Colorado State would be great people to share all of what we know about aging and behavior and dementia with your listeners. So Dr. Bray and Dr. McLean have a paper that they're just about to submit looking at how different the ability to learn declines with age. So you can try and teach dogs new tricks, and it turns out that it really does become harder to learn new tricks for some dogs as they get older. The question is, in some dogs, might that actually be a predictor of dementia? It's an important open question that we're looking at. And then, of course, what I know your listeners would love to know is, are there things that they can do to prevent dementia or to even treat dementia? And here is where the answer is, as far as I know, not yet. But because everything happens so quickly in dogs, we are in a really good position to learn quickly about both prevention and treatment in a way that has proven so difficult in humans. The National Institute on Aging has put so much money, so much effort into funding scientists working on this problem, and we've yet to discover a drug that can treat or prevent Alzheimer's disease. I think we might get there first in dogs, and if we can, of course, that's going to be great for dogs and dog owners, and may also ultimately help us understand how to treat or prevent dementia in humans.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I'm really excited to hear. My mom passed a couple of years from Alzheimer's disease, or the consequences of Alzheimer's disease and diseases that come with it. Me, being so into the new science and new biology ever since, have found great interest, but obviously because I'm also at risk, right, automatically, to see where this is going. And I think there's the from what I take from the research and everything, is there's much more we are probably being able to do about it. We just don't know yet what exactly it is, but it is not necessarily as you're going to get it and it's going to happen for sure to whatever extent. I think there's a lot more that we will be able to understand and can do about it. We just got to keep researching it.
On another topic, one thing I want to mention to your listeners, because I get lots of questions about this, and especially those of your listeners who are already participating in the Dog Aging Project, there was a lot of press at the end of 2023 and the beginning of 2024 about NIH not funding our U19 Dog Aging Project grant, and people were worried about the project shutting down. The good news is the ship is afloat. My co-founders, Matt Caberline and Kate Creevy, and I created a Dog Aging Institute to raise funds. The Institute has as its goal to improve healthy aging in dogs and ultimately in people by promoting dog aging research and providing funding to people doing that kind of work, educating the public through this kind of thing, for example. We've raised a good amount of money through our institute, enough to keep the ship afloat. The engines are kind of idling, so we're still fundraising so we can start pushing on the throttle and doing more science. Yesterday, we submitted the next version of our U19 grant, we'll hear in a few months from NIH about how that goes, but we anticipate we have enough money to keep us going until next spring, and then we anticipate that all will go well and NIH will start funding our work again next spring. So for those of you who are worried, don't worry, we are alive and well, although we can certainly use people's help. But I want to reassure people that we are still up and running, and we're one of the largest long-term aging studies in the world, and we're too valuable to let fail. So my colleagues and I are making sure that that doesn't happen.
Yes, I would encourage everyone who's listening to not just participate, but help and support, because again, this is something that doesn't happen anywhere else but here, right? And this is our chance to get insights that we might not get otherwise, right? As a parting question, and I realized we didn't talk as much about behavior as I wanted to, but because all the other questions were so interesting too. But have you looked into, or are you going to look into anything that is related to anxiety, or dogs that, for example, don't like other humans or don't like other dogs, anything that we usually identify as behavior problems? And other than the training aspect or the experience aspect, have you found, or are you looking into anything that also kind of almost like a biomarker also says, well, this dog is not going to like other dogs, or not going to be friendly with strangers because of ABCD or anything like that?
A great question of personal interest. We have a dog in our home who's a mix. He's a curly-coated retriever beagle cross, and he is extremely anxious. Our veterinarian prescribed Prozac, fluoxetine for him. He's very sweet and lovable and anxious. So I'm interested in that question. We don't have anyone currently working on that, and we do ask our owners about all kinds of behaviors, including anxiety around people and other kinds of things and noises. Our own dog is afraid of the sound of falling leaves. The autumn is a difficult time for him. So not something that we're working on. They're just effectively an infinite number of questions we could ask. I think that's a great question. And if you'd like to work on it, let me know.
I just might. Maybe this is what we're going to do. I'm really interested in that. Yeah. And, it might not be, again, black and white answers, but it's just something that puts things more into context. It's always like a big 100,000 pieces puzzle that we're just trying to figure out one piece at a time.
And I think there's the kind of trait, anxiety, where it would really be a perfect thing that captures our whole scientific world. We could ask you about the genetic basis. Is there a genetic basis of anxiety? Are there any environmental experiences that are associated with developing anxiety, maybe early life experiences? And then are there biomarkers, maybe stress hormones in the blood, for example, or toxins, heavy metals or something like that, that are associated with anxiety? So it's a kind of question where I think the Dog Aging Project has really tremendous potential to help us answer.
I think this has to be continued between the two of us and keep talking about this. I'm very interested in looking into this more. I will definitely dig into the data and probably will reach out again to see and get your input on this. And maybe we can do something on that project. I'm happy to put my data science skills into practice again with a large data set. We're used to it. And then hopefully we can answer some more questions about dog behavior.
That would be great. And if anyone else listening to this is a data scientist or any kind of scientist interested in working on our data and would like to reach out, please do so. And let me just also end with a pitch that we are still recruiting. If you would like to participate or just read our blog posts or some of our papers, dogagingproject.org. If you're interested in supporting us or you know someone who would like to, dogaginginstitute.org. And if you'd like to learn more, just reach out to us. We're always interested to hear from folks.
I love that. And I can tell you're so passionate about it and so curious about it, especially everyone listening with a working dog, right? We want to increase that cohort of all disciplines. And then a couple of years from now, we'll get some interesting answers.
And Melanie, thank you. This was really fun. It was a great
Same.
conversation. Really enjoyed talking with you.
Same. Thank you so much for making time. You know, we had to reschedule a couple times. I'm so glad we finally made it happen. And I will let you go on with your day. Thank you so much. Have a great Memorial weekend coming up. And, we'll stay in touch.
Great. And may you and all your listeners enjoy their beloved companion dogs.
Yes.